you remember a time in your life when you had to stay behind in school? After the day had ended, maybe you had detention or an after-school program. Maybe it was parents' evening. For some reason or another, you were in school, it was dark outside, it was quiet, and you were by yourself. In my early years of secondary school, I experienced this a lot. At least once a week, I'd have detention or homework club, and getting out, I'd find myself in the school corridors, alone. This feeling of seeing this place I was so familiar with completely uninhabited was very distinct. I was fascinated with the way this would make me feel so much that instead of going straight home, I would spend 10 to 20 minutes walking through all of the hallways. This became a regular habit of mine, and although it was probably partially due to the adrenaline of being somewhere that I felt I wasn't supposed to be, it was mainly to do with my fascination with this feeling it would evoke. It was a feeling that I'd felt before, at many points in my life, but I could never really describe to myself what these feelings were. There's three notable concepts that I think evoke these feelings: liminal spaces, romanticism, and the earlier versions of Minecraft. I know what you're thinking. How could these three things possibly be related? Well, let me tell you. Before we analyse how all of these are related, I think it's best I briefly explain each of the concepts, starting with Before I say anything, I want you to look at these pictures. What do you think and feel when seeing them? I want you to be aware of the emotions that these images evoke. Got something in mind? Okay, cool. A liminal space is best described as a place that borders on familiarity and the unknown. Some describe them as the uncanny valley of physical places. They're typically open areas such as corridors, hallways, stairwells, classrooms, all of which are empty. They can often be locations associated with childhood, like swimming pools, play areas, and classrooms. Despite the seemingly mundane nature of them, they often evoke a profound sense of nostalgia and mystery. Integral to the idea of a liminal space is familiarity. They are familiar places in unfamiliar contexts. More often than not, places that should be populated but aren't. This almost tranquil nature of these places often prompt people to dwell on childhood memories or distant dreams. However, the mysterious aspect of these places can quickly become fear. Due to their nature, they have this eerie quality to them. This is best realised in the internet horror concept known as the backrooms, which is essentially a twilight zone of endless liminal spaces to be trapped in forever, with the fear of something unknown just out of sight stalking you. The backrooms, however, isn't something I want to focus on in this video, as it only magnifies a certain part of the wider themes of a liminal space that I'm trying to capture. As much as I've tried to, there really is no way to define a liminal space. Although they're officially defined as transitionary spaces, I feel as though this definition does not capture what the term has evolved to mean. Really, a liminal space cannot have a conventional definition because they rely so heavily on the perceiver. For instance, liminal spaces are often modern architecture. That will have been anything made any time after the 50s, somewhere up to the 2010s. But this isn't because modern architecture is a necessary quality for a liminal space, but that familiarity and nostalgia are necessary for liminal spaces. And for the current generation of people, these are the buildings that we are familiar with and nostalgic for. It's possible that during the Victorian period or the medieval era, they had their own liminal spaces. In fact, many people argue that Edward Hopper was one of the first artists to capture liminal spaces. So really, a liminal space is a space that evokes the feeling of a liminal space. Huh. That is a circular definition, and those are bad. I think Socrates said that, maybe. However, that's kind of what I love about them. The undefinable, almost indescribable aspects to them. Despite my lengthy description, if I hadn't shown you those examples of liminal spaces, or if you hadn't seen one before, then you would not understand what a liminal space is. The only way to know what they are is to see them and feel them. The next thing I want to talk about is I promise you this is going to make sense. But before I do, again, I want you to look at these paintings. I want you to make yourself aware of the emotions and thoughts that you get from looking at these paintings. Okay? Cool. Romanticism was a movement in art, literature, and philosophy that emerged in the late 18th century in Germany. It was a direct response against the Enlightenment, which the Romantics felt reduced the world to facts and equations and held no importance for imagination or the divinity of nature. Romanticism focused on the idea of the sublime. Central to the Romanticist idea of the sublime was the concept of awe-inspiring experiences that evoke a sense of beauty, comfort, and an overwhelming fear. It highlighted man's insignificance compared to the vastness and the beauty of the natural world, yet somehow found great comfort in that fact. The sublime was seen as something beyond what humans were able to comprehend. Artists often set out to capture these experiences and evoke feelings of wonder, fear, and admiration using striking landscapes that featured the raw beauty of nature. Probably one of the most well-renowned romantic painters, and my favourite, was Caspar David Friedrich. He was a German painter born in the late 18th century. He's well known for his beautiful landscapes, but he also captured landscapes which, at the time, were not what many people immediately thought of as beautiful. Misty, damp, cold, jagged mountainous landscapes of northern Germany, a place that he had a lot of nostalgia for. In fact, much of the landscapes that Friedrich painted were not real. They were, in fact, collections of different natural formations and old ruined buildings that he merged together to create a romanticized, nostalgic depiction of his country. Because really, Friedrich's landscapes were not actually the main focus of his paintings. The main focus of his paintings were the feelings that occur when viewing the landscapes, the sublime. Although I've been talking about how much the sublime depends on nature for the Romanticists, there are other elements to Friedrich's paintings that contribute to this feeling. The inclusion of old ruined buildings like castles or church monasteries amplifies that overwhelming aspect of nature. It forces us to reevaluate our size in the world and makes us come to terms with our fleeting existence as opposed to the natural world which seems undying. Almost all of Friedrich's paintings include a person with their back to the viewer. These are known as Rücken figures. The correct pronunciation probably sounds more German. The Rücken figures will usually be depicted as small and tiny compared to the vast expanses of the landscapes in front of them. This helps capture the confusing beauty and fear of the sublime. Except like the most famous one, but nostalgia is also an important aspect for Friedrich's sublime. At a personal level, Friedrich's paintings are nostalgic, as they reflect the beauty and the solitude of the German landscape in which he grew up. But you could also say that Friedrich's paintings reflect a mass nostalgia, or a national nostalgia. The inclusion of old ruins like the ones in Abbey in the Oakwood, the Dreamer, and the Temple of Juno in Agrigento fill people with an eerie nostalgia that make us think of the past that could have been and the future that we lost. They fill people with a nostalgia for their country's past, or even a mythologized, romanticized version of their country's past. This is best reflected in Tomb of the Old Heroes, or its alternative name, Arminius' grave. Arminius was famous for leading an alliance of united Germanic tribes against the Romans. This immortalized him as a national hero, and he became a strong icon of German nationalism in the 18th and 19th century. Friedrich himself was a nationalist, not to be confused with the Nazi regime of the 20th century. And so this painting perfectly encapsulates the anti-Napoleonic struggle and the desire to unify the smaller German states into one German nation. This is a topic that could easily spiral out of control and become its own video, so I think it's best we move on. Like the second and third, I want you to look at these images and become aware of the feelings and the thoughts that you get from them. I'm sure everybody knows what Minecraft is. A game created by Marcus Persons, otherwise known as Notch, in 2009. Anyone who played Minecraft will know that the game has this weird feeling that's hard to describe. It was much more present in the earlier versions of the game, when the graphics were more sharp, blocky, and pixelated, as opposed to the soft gradients and more detailed blocks of today's updates. The game was simpler, its colours were more saturated, the terrain generation was striking and beautiful, and the caves were less detailed. And ultimately, the world felt less alive. I think that's why, in the newer versions of the game, this feeling is less present. The game has so many features and animals and complex villager mechanics that there's a lot more to distract you from this feeling. But what is this feeling? People like to attribute it to nostalgia, and people like me see the old versions of the game through rose-tinted glasses. But that can't be the case. I and many people like me felt this even while we were young in the earlier days of the game. I remember having this feeling when I was young on the single player worlds that me and my brother had made. I think a good example I can give is this video, The 12 Days of Minecraft. It's a Minecraft parody of the 12 Days of Christmas. I remember watching it as a kid, and certain shots of the interior of the house and the snowy landscape filled me with this weird, cozy, nostalgic, isolated feeling. But this video was uploaded in January 2012. I was very young at the time. What did I have to be nostalgic for? I wasn't nostalgic for Minecraft because it was arguably at its peak at this time. So, what was this feeling? Similar to the other things I've talked about, an integral part of this feeling is isolation. Single-player Minecraft is almost designed to be isolating, where other games try to supplement this with NPCs that are programmed to resemble humans with human thought, and coded with personalities and reactions, even some with their own character arcs. Minecraft says, no, you are alone. Any creatures in this game, be it hostile enemies, animals, or villagers, look and act extremely simply. This feeling of isolation, though, causes one's mind to wonder about if there's something more, or if there was something more. The game leans into this well by scattering seemingly man-made structures around the map, ruined temples, abandoned mine shafts, and the ruins of an underground stronghold. These ruins almost mimic what we saw in the works of Caspar David Friedrich. They show us enough, yet tell us so little that it upholds the sense of mystery and isolation in the world. As a child, I would stare into the textures of the zombies and notice that they were the same as the default character of the game, Steve, except they were green. And as the melancholic music by C418 would kick in, it made me think about what this world used to be. I would think that it used to be populated by some great medieval fantasy empire that was lost long ago. Very reminiscent of Caspar David Friedrich, I almost felt nostalgic for something that I'd never known. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This mysterious fascination with the isolation I had as a child could also quickly turn to fear. When faced with isolation, the human mind will start to fear if you're truly alone. This feeling was perfectly personified in Herobrine. The original concept of Herobrine was terrifying, and it was something that a lot of people, including myself, genuinely believed in. It was like an online digital cryptid. There was this fear that when playing alone in your world, when the render distance is low and your world is foggy, you might catch something moving in the corner of your eye, something that resembles a player with empty, hollow eyes, always obscured by the fog. Then, you'd start to find things in your world. I was always afraid that I'd find something man-made in my world, like a 1x2 tunnel lit with redstone torches, or a strange building, or a forest of trees with no leaves. The myth went that Herobrine was the creator of the game's brother who had passed away, a digital ghost, still haunting the code. Back in the day, the developers of Minecraft were amazing at leaning into these feelings. The inclusion of cave sounds, which I'm sure traumatized a generation.
We got some sheep here.
Hello? What the frick is that?
And the creepy music discs 13 and disc 11 added to the eerie feeling of the game. As a child, I could not bring myself to listen to these. Not because they were so scary, but because playing them, paired with being alone in a single player world, I would get the most uneasy feeling. The composer for all the original Minecraft tracks was a genius. C418's melancholic and nostalgic soundtrack was perfectly able to capture this feeling of Minecraft that I'm trying to describe in his beautiful melodies. This is something that I think the new composer of the game, Liminality, just doesn't do as well. Now, if you've been listening closely, you've probably already started putting the pieces together on how these things could be related. I think it's a good idea to go through them one by one to connect and show how similar everything is. So let's start with the Sublime and Minecraft. Perhaps the most obvious connection between these two is the importance of nature. Nature is an integral aspect of both Romanticism and Minecraft. Now, of course, Romanticism is beautiful, but despite the blocky texture, Minecraft's random terrain generation can also produce some really beautiful landscapes, be it a striking mountainscape or a small charming valley. Despite this, however, you're quickly reminded that you are placed into a practically infinite world with little to no man-made structures or civilization. It can start to feel empty. The endless expanse of Minecraft's natural landscapes can be beautiful, but also feel overwhelming and isolating, much like the paintings of Caspar David Friedrich that rely on the Rücken figures to express the minuscule and isolating feeling that nature can evoke. So, Minecraft and the Sublime both use nature as their primary setting to evoke both beauty and isolation. Both Minecraft and the Sublime carry strong feelings of nostalgia and mystery. They both use ruins to evoke a longing for a time you never knew or never existed. They force us to wonder what possible history or lore is behind them, and they can also cause a similar unsettling feeling caused by the isolation and the unknown. It is in this respect that I think Minecraft is a digital version of the Sublime. It almost perfectly captures the feelings and emotions evoked by Friedrich's paintings. Now, you may be thinking, surely a more modern game like Red Dead Redemption 2 is a better example of digital Sublime. It's got much better graphics, the environments are probably some of the most stunning environments in gaming. Well, you're wrong. Don't get me wrong, Red Dead 2 is very beautiful and does partially capture what I'm talking about. However, Red Dead 2's graphics are so good that the landscape ends up looking like real life. You can't call that the digital Sublime because it is just Sublime, whereas Minecraft is so similar to the Sublime in its beauty and emotion, yet so stylized and so obviously digital that it can be called its own unique concept, digital Sublime. Moving on, Minecraft and liminal spaces. In my opinion, the most notable similarity between liminal spaces and Minecraft is architecture. As previously mentioned, liminal spaces are often open areas like hallways or empty offices. The limited block palette and less block types in early Minecraft meant that houses and builds were much less detailed and more simplistic. The fewer amount of decorative items meant that builds were often empty, or people had to use their creativity to create makeshift furniture, the result of which would often look very liminal. The two also evoke similar feelings of nostalgia, different to the grand nostalgia of the Romantics. This is a much more personal nostalgia. Liminal spaces often depict childhood locations or places that we're familiar with in a way that can resemble a memory. And as I said before, there was something nostalgic about the aesthetic of Minecraft, even back then. And so although I don't believe the feeling can be fully attributed to nostalgia, I do think there was something cozy and comforting about the game that even back then I was able to recognize. As I've already said, Minecraft can be lonely. Well, liminal spaces are also defined by their emptiness. This isolation can create a feeling of solitude and reflection, but also quickly become an eerie dread when faced with loneliness and the unknown. In fact, both liminal spaces and Minecraft had horror concepts which tried to delve into these fears, both of which eventually became diluted and misunderstood in an attempt to appeal to children. They both very much blur the line between beauty and fear. In fact, I would say that Minecraft is like a natural liminal space. Not in the sense that it's naturally occurring, but it's a depiction of natural landscapes, yet it holds all of the qualities and feelings that you would associate with a liminal space. Finally, liminal spaces and the Sublime. I think these are the two that appear to be the most different. However, it was the similarities that I noticed between these two that actually prompted me to create this video. The role of isolation in liminal spaces and romantic paintings are very similar. Although Minecraft can be isolating, the interactive nature of a video game means that there are lots of tasks and activities for you to do that can distract you from this feeling. With liminal spaces and Romanticism, however, there is no temporary escape from this isolation. Both liminal spaces and Romanticism have an overwhelming, incomprehensible quality to them. Where the romantic sublime overwhelms us with the grandeur of nature, liminal spaces overwhelm us with its uncanny familiarity. They both use their settings to induce nostalgia and a longing for a time that is likely idealized. Where the romantics of the 19th century longed to return to nature and mythologized versions of their country's past, the people of the 21st century direct their nostalgia towards the dull, mass-produced buildings that we grew up with. I would say the liminal spaces are the modern-day Romanticism, and we find the sublime in the mundane architecture present in our memories. So, I've talked about how all these topics are related, but what is it that actually links them? What's this shared feeling that I felt in these three very different concepts? What was that feeling I had when wandering my school corridors? What was this feeling when I was inside my poorly built Minecraft house in the dim torchlight in 2011? Why is this feeling so hard to describe? Well, it's so hard to describe because the feelings were almost paradoxical. They were a combination of many different things, as you've seen, and they were, in a way, an echo of the sublime. You see, where the Romantics in the past found the sublime in nature and its striking mountains and foggy marshes, in its vast oceans and ruined monuments, we live in a very different world. This generation is possibly the most disconnected from nature yet, and so the emotions of the sublime, the beauty, the comfort and the terror, are less obviously present in the modern consciousness. Instead, we were raised in a world of mass production. We are familiar with the digital and the artificial, and so naturally we find slightly uncanny replacements for the sublime. The empty liminal spaces give us the liminal sublime, and the eerie solitude and aesthetics of Minecraft give us the digital sublime. Our separation from nature means the fear of its overwhelming size and presence is dampened. However, that fear never really leaves us, and is instead directed towards the empty spaces and artificial worlds of today. Now, although I've technically identified these feelings with concepts and names and words, these are not sufficient to understand it. Just as facts about joy do not equate to the experience of joy, you need to go out into the world and find these feelings. Next time you get the chance, stay a little bit late at school or the office, walk around, boot up an old version of Minecraft, turn off the lights and immerse yourself. Go on a hike, explore a ruin as the sun comes up. Experience these feelings, reflect on them, and hopefully, like me, you'll find an appreciation for them.